So focusing is essentially this ability, and these are natural skills, but it requires kind of a slowing down. This ability to kind of check inside with ourselves, and basically it's a fresh felt sense arrives.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. My name is Josh Levine, your host. Today marks an evolution of this show. Previously on this show, I have exclusively done long-form interviews with people of each Enneagram type, and I'm expanding the show to include interviews with people who are practitioners of different modalities of inner work or experts in different models of the inner world, of development itself, etc. So I'm very excited to welcome my first guest in this expansion. Jahmi Burg is a practitioner of one of my favorite inner work modalities called focusing. Focusing is not what it sounds like. It was invented by or discovered by a guy named Gendlin, and sometimes it's referred to as Gendlin's focusing. And what it is it's a way of tuning in to your pre-verbal body's felt sense of a situation or just something going on in your life. More than any other modality, focusing helped me understand what is meant by the intelligence of the body. It is a profoundly useful and kind of almost intuitive way of working with yourself, and I've likened it before to being guided through a waking dream state. Typically what you do in a focusing session is you are guided by a companion into an inner state of sensing what's going on in you, and then you are kind of verbally reporting on what is happening inside, and then the companion is reflecting back to you things that are helping you stay in contact with that felt sense, and the felt sense has some things to say. So what I've done in this interview is structured it in such a way that we give a bit of an intro, and then I have Sandy actually guide me through a focusing session. It takes about 20 minutes. And then afterwards, we debrief and unpack it and kind of take you into the practitioner's lens, like what the hell is actually happening here? What are you watching? And we kind of take you step by step through what a focusing journey entails, what it is, and what's happening kind of behind my eyes or inside my inner world in these long stretches of silence, or in just in these moments when I'm sort of disconnected from the social engagement, from the conversation with her, and I'm kind of connected just to myself intrapersonally. Focusing is one of those things that can be very difficult to explain. It really needs to be experienced to understand what it is, but it continues to be a modality that I send people to often. I recommend frequently as a way to get in touch with your body, to slow down, to connect to gut intelligence, and to start understanding the whole universe that is your pre-verbal inner space. So I think that's a pretty good introduction for now. I'm very excited for you to learn from my focusing teacher, Jahmi Burg. By the way, you can find her at learnfocusing.org. She has classes that she teaches that are level 1 through 4. And then afterwards, she can help you on the path to becoming a certified focusing practitioner if that's something you're interested in. But I'm very excited for you to get a taste and a teaser of what focusing is through this conversation and demo. So without further ado, here is my friend and teacher, Sandy. So why don't we start with, what is focusing?
What is focusing? Yeah. So it's very interesting. So the term focusing was named by Eugene Gendlin, a philosopher who essentially he had the opportunity to work with Carl Rogers, so in the field of psychotherapy. And as he was doing that, let's say, I guess too, he tells stories now that he was looking for focusing because of childhood experiences where he wanted to understand how someone has a knowing, like a knowing that feels like authentic truth, such that they will do really brave, courageous things, like following that knowing. So he had that from his childhood that kind of geared him up. And then he had this opportunity to work with Carl Rogers, and they were the first ones, as far as we're aware, that did recordings of therapy sessions to kind of
I see.
observe what was going on. This was in the 1950s. And essentially, from these observations, they recognized that it was not something that the therapist was necessarily doing. It was not a particular technique that would actually create a successful movement for the client such that, they would go on with their lives and be complete. It was something that the client themselves were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's similar to what I'm doing now. They would kind of slow down as they were talking and kind of be groping for the right words,
Mm-hmm.
like they were
Yeah.
listening inside themselves. And
Yeah.
it is so focusing is essentially this ability, and these are natural skills, but it requires kind of a slowing down, this ability to kind of check inside with ourselves, and some basically it's a fresh felt sense arrives.
So there's a couple of things that I want to pull out of what you're saying. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
just this idea of an inner knowing that that arises from within, that if we can anchor to it in some kind of way or honor it and let it fill us,
Mm-hmm.
then it is the basis for courage and for forward motion in our lives. And so that's paragraph one. That's a very, first of all, profound thing. And then the other thing that you said that I think is really profound is how when Gendlin and Carl Rogers were doing their research, one of the things that came out of it was that it didn't really matter the theoretical orientation of the therapist or their modality of how they were working with a person. One of the key ingredients, as I remember, there were three, right? It was like the empathic. There were three criteria for a successful therapeutic process or relationship. One is the empathic capacity of the therapist, no matter what they were kind of
Right.
doing.
Yeah,
One
so
is
the
the
therapist does matter in that
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then one is the quality of the relationship in some kind of way, and then
Mm-hmm.
the third thing had nothing to do with the therapist, which is literally it was the client's own ability to sense what was freshly arising within them. Because a lot of times what happens in therapy is people go to therapy and they have a story about I'm depressed because X, Y, or Z, and they just keep looping on the story and they're not sensing what we would call in focusing what is life forward within them. So
Right.
this idea, this word life forward comes, and so life forward, like the way that I remember you explaining this in class once, but like the way that it kind of hit me as a very simple idea is like anytime you have a sensation, it is expressing or implying something to do next,
Mm-hmm.
which we call the
Mm-hmm.
life forward movement. So, for example, you put your hand on a hot stove, ouch. It's implying that you should take your hand off the stove.
Yeah.
And that's you could call it a gross sensation in this, like gross versus subtle, meaning it's like a very
Mm-hmm.
obvious sensation. But there are these really subtle sensations that we have inside, like when we slow down and we just sit and kind of wait for something to arrive, like we feel a block in our chest or something in our stomach or something tingling in our shoulders. And when we sit with that, that also implies something life forward for us. So I wonder if this is so abstract. I'm also smiling because I love focusing, and it's probably the modality that has kind of connected with my organism in the deepest way of all the things that I've tried. And also, it is one of the hardest things I've ever had to explain to a person who's never done it, because I've used terms like it's almost like being led through a waking dream state or tuning into your body's felt sense of something, and the felt sense speaks to you. It has some wisdom for you if you can slow down and listen to it. So anyway, I've been saying a lot. I wonder if you have any color commentary on that, and then maybe we do a demo. to kind of drop in and get a sense of what actually happens in a focusing session?
Yeah. And I think I want to come back with what's actually pretty simple,
Uh huh.
although actually practicing it, like you said, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a simple thing of what we want to do is be in relationship.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And and it's also, another way I described that was this sense of you go inside and you open a space. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but essentially, if we're not in relationship with something, so it's like if we get a belief, like I believe, for instance, there's snow outside. I believe that snow's too heavy for me to shovel. And I agree with that belief. You know, then that's not shifting. My behavior is going to be not getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas if I can step back from, okay, so the snow is kind of heavy, maybe I can find a way. So what comes up automatically in me is like, well, yeah, you can take really small shovels full. Like you don't have to like push all the way across. You can just take a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's like I can find ways then to do what I when I'm agreeing with, and we kind of call that or not in relationship with, merged with
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that idea, then there's no change. Like it simply is your reality. And
Right.
when you can kind of step back and give it some space, I can be in relationship with that belief that the snow is too heavy. Yeah, the snow might be too heavy for the normal way I would approach shoveling. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I could approach shoveling in a different way today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there we go. Like that's it. And that's what we want
Yeah.
to, maybe as we do a demo here, maybe they can watch for how that happens.
Okay. Let's do that. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, let's dig into the demo. And one thing just to point out is that with focusing, sometimes people ask me like, because I often send clients to you, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, and they're like, okay, so what are we gonna do? And I've been working with them on some issue that's coming up in their lives, and I say, okay, bring that issue to Sandy, and then we'll invite what is here about that issue. So this idea of making an invitation as you enter a focusing session,
Yes, that's
yeah,
huge.
is huge. So, and you can also do a focusing session just without an invitation, just whatever is here. But you can also kind of direct your focusing session to be about something.
Mm-hmm.
So, so let's do. Just thinking about what invitation to make here, and I'm thinking about um, something that comes up for me every time I do one of these interviews is the anxiety of, is this going well? Is this interesting? Are people um, gonna get anything out of this? You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's invite that and see what happens.
Okay. And are you going
Yeah,
to be focuser?
yeah. Let's do that, and let's have you
Yeah.
be the
Yeah.
companion.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right.
And maybe we'll go for
Um,
7 to 10 minutes. However, if yeah, you can kind of sense it.
yeah. Okay. And so we'll just kind of begin. I'm just going to check with you with how I can support you right now.
Oh, let's also do a lead in.
Okay. So I'll
Um,
do the lead in.
do the lead in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll mention something here then just to kind of explain. In order for a felt sense to form. So since Gendlin did that initial research, we've learned a lot essentially about these skills. We've been studying them, and how to support, uh, you know, being able to have them be more, natural in our daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we've found is that in order for a felt sense to form, we need to kind of feel safe in our current environment.
Right.
And then I also want you to be in the present moment. In neuroscience terms, we would describe that as being in your right hemisphere or your body. And so, yeah, so just so people know, uh, that's kind of our general goals. And so I'm going to begin by actually having you just acknowledge the space around you. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I know just finding something and it feels familiar can be so helpful. And then, beginning to kind of bring your awareness closer to the outer edges of your body. And so feeling like those contact points, which you did. See how Josh naturally. And yeah. And then there's maybe this sense of kind of just leisurely acknowledging anything, that feels like it's already here. It's just kind of clearing a space, in order for you to really be with what you're going to invite. And interesting, your invitation is probably here. So maybe we'll just kind of say hello to this, however that is for you now, that sense of anxiety and wondering, and then finding your way to your breath. I often like to encourage someone to practice that relationship here with your breath. See if you can really feel yourself alongside that which breathes you. Even though we all often do so much breath work, we don't necessarily feel ourselves alongside. And then, you're going to kind of drop into that whole inner area. And we like to say kind of from your throat to your pelvic floor. And there's a sense of kind of finding what feels like your center. Yeah. And maybe, really picturing yourself in kind of a welcoming space in front of you. And then giving yourself this invitation, and inviting all this around, these recordings being, bringing them out into the world. What that means for you, freshly and waiting. And when you're aware of something, you might let me know.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was aware of just a lot of energy, kind of more towards the upper part of my body, kind of all over the place.
Okay.
And let's see, there might be more texture about it. No, just energy. Like it had this feeling. I don't know what this means, but this gesture.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is this gesture, this energy in the upper part of your body, and it has a sense to me of kind of wanting to move, wanting to, let's see, taking that back. And so this is something I'll just, for everyone watching, key thing is that we want to take back and check with our body that we're understanding it right. So what comes here?
Yes, you just use the word, or kind of characterize it as wanting to move. So I'm taking that back in. It feels not quite right. It feels like move, but more like a control. Actually, is the word.
Okay. Yeah. So you're
Yeah.
understanding it's wanting to
Uh-huh.
control
Yeah.
how it how it goes out there. Let's see what feels.
It's wanting to, I'll tell you what it is. It's wanting to control, like, okay, um, you and the way the the definitions sort of sequence themselves and the terms. Like I sort of want it. I almost have like the. It's almost like it's connected to some kind of inner sense of what would be the optimal way to present this in a way that makes sense to people,
Ah.
and then a sense of control around that.
Okay. So that's here.
Yeah, that's
Something
here.
that, yeah, believes it has a knowing about an optimal way to to explain focusing.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, so you might really let it know you hear that. And
Mhm.
and what comes to me is there's a real passion in that. Yeah.
Mhm. Wow. I'm sort of doing this at the same time. I want to comment, like,
Mhm.
that thing of getting into relationship with that thing is so huge, and you emphasize this a lot in all of your classes.
Mhm.
That's the key move,
Mhm.
is whatever's here, bringing yourself, capital S, into relationship with that thing. And it's kind of like there's almost like a like an unmerging, like an unenmeshing. In IFS they would call it unblending, right? It's like a
Mhm.
with that thing. So I'm just, anyway, that's kind of what's happening in me right now. Or I'm kind of,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, creating
actually,
more space maybe.
let me take a second with it just so I kind of drop back into it. Yeah, I experience it as like it's right here, somewhere in my chest, but also it has energy like out of my body, out like in this general vicinity, out right in front of me.
Mhm.
And I experience it as like a sentient entity, and its form isn't quite constellated in my mind's eye yet, but it feels like it is a something, you know, here.
Yeah. So here you are together,
Hmm.
you and this kind of sentient energy. And so what comes to me is to kind of invite you to kind of sense how it would like you to be with it. So there's a sense of settling down with it, uh, and you are following this energy and finding what feels like it can work right now.
I'll tell you, what I'm noticing about it is that it's really intense. It feels very strong.
Mm. Okay, and so that feels actually that's one of the skills that often can come up, that is to acknowledge it's really intense. It's so strong,
Hmm.
as a way to help ourselves become bigger. So it's going to need a lot of space. Like you need to be bigger than.
It feels like there's a kind of wordless acknowledgments that just happened. Like I just moved my body in that way, and it kind of, and I
Mm-hmm.
was breathing differently, and it kind of made me feel wider in my back.
Mm. Okay, yeah. So there is this sense of, yeah, feeling wider in your back. And
Yeah, and
maybe,
this,
yeah.
or this entity kind of, it noticed in a certain way, or I sensed that
Mm-hmm.
it noticed. You know.
Yeah. So, so this can be a really powerful moment within there where, how you respond to it seeing you. And so let's just really see, like, say, can you really be right welcoming? And how do how do your eyes meet it now?
Well, maybe a way to say it is that I don't feel uh, as intimidated by it.
Ah,
You know, I
yeah.
feel more like I can meet it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it feels. It's. I'm sensing that it feels kind of calmer with me.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So this would be a huge goal of focusing. It's essentially like how we learn, right, to create space for all of our body to communicate with us and feel welcome and seen and accepted, and essentially, yeah, I'm thinking that maybe we look for a gentle stopping place, because this is
Yeah.
huge. Because if we can create this kind of environment, then more of our body's knowing shows up. um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah, so somehow, as you're, which maybe now, finding a way, right, to kind of continue appreciating where you are now, and letting, yeah, maybe continuing to listen, of course, as you move forward with this whole project.
Yeah, you know what's occurring to me is that, like it's in a way, its message for me is that um, I can sort of participate in a conversation with whoever I'm interviewing as a kind of equal in a certain way, and not like there's a way that maybe I wasn't before, or that it's like let me get other words around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically like, oh, you have a perspective to share that is actually valuable, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a conversation between two people. It's not just a spotlight, you know, on
Okay,
the
yeah.
interview or
So there
something
is
like
a
that.
shift in
Yeah,
perspective of,
yeah, yeah.
I feel that a more of a live interaction going on than, uh, right, just
Right.
the spotlight, which would have, right, particular goals. Yeah, yeah. So what comes to me is, we have a favorite phrase in focusing: "No wonder." Anyway,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
no wonder
Right.
it would. And then now it's yeah. There's this little bit different view.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll encourage you to kind of stay with that. So
Yeah.
this is a whole nother aspect. So when something shifts like this and we have this little bit of life forward flow, we want to stay with it as long as it's here, which really, yeah, we'll talk about that after. But so doing that, and then when it kind of dissipates, yeah, that's when you might bring your awareness kind of back to the outer space.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that's hard to explain about focusing is that so much of it is just like a wordless metabolizing
Mm-hmm.
that happens at the level of the felt sense.
Yeah.
So that last minute of silence was just me. It's like I experienced an actual inner shift, something like woke up and got acknowledged in me, and that felt more better aligned. I felt more here. It was kind of like that message that this sentient entity wanted me to hear. I received it, and then it kind of had an impact internally. That impact spread like a sensation, almost like it kind of spread through my body, and I was kind of just waiting for it to complete itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You
it's
know?
important that we allow that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something else I might point out, but let's follow up with that. In
Mm-hmm.
Just culturally, we're conditioned to, we tend to pay more attention to the negative, like the things that feel like problems to solve.
Right.
And we can, just, however, you know, then when we find a solution, we don't pause to really allow this new perspective that just came here to kind of really be what I'll say, like it could be the way you experience these kind of situations from now on.
Uh-huh.
However, if you haven't really, celebrated that, or allowed it to uh, spread in the way it needs to, which is kind of a neural, there's basically, I describe it as neural rewiring going on, possibly myelinating.
Right.
uh, yeah, that it, and that awareness, basically that simple awareness that we are kind of trained to kind of flip over, kind of flip past those things. And so that takes some real practice of really slowing down with, uh, whoa, like, uh, I was with someone who, normally makes me tense, and now I was much more welcoming to them, and let's how cool that is that I can be more comfortable. Uh,
Yeah. You know, what strikes me so much about this whole way of experiencing yourself is that, like, you can have an insight and it can exist sort of up here as a thought, you know, and then
mhm.
here's another way to put it. It's like, in I hear people saying things like, they're going to set an intention to be more of a certain kind of way. Like 2024, I'm going to be more courageous and stronger. I'm going to take more risks, and that's the intention. And
Mhm.
and then it's like they assert this frame upon themselves that exists at the level of the minds, but it hasn't trickled into the kind of heart and body. You know, it hasn't actually,
Yeah.
and it's almost like a super ego imposition on the inner structure that hasn't actually integrated it. And focusing is this thing that allows whatever insight to get
Trickle
digested,
in
you know?
to get digested and become your natural way of being. Not
Yeah.
something you even have to think about. Like you are naturally, yeah, strong and courageous. And not having to do it with that sense of because right, we can go through the whole year of okay, being aware that this is one of those opportunities of testing. So, okay, I'm going to make myself be strong here. And we can do that. And we're going to be with all these uncomfortable feelings and we're going to overpower them. And
Yeah.
the thing is, like, we are not actually comfortable in that experience. And the people around us won't be because they're sensing our uncomfortableness that we're trying to push down. And so it really doesn't, it just doesn't work. But that is the typical way, right? We might often approach these kind of things. And this is so different. It's uh, softer and trusting of our own body process that we can get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, something else you said about the positive, like negative positive thing is that one of the cool things about focusing is that I usually, not every time, but I usually leave a focusing session feeling so good. Just like my whole body feels
Mm-hmm.
like it got filled up with that thing that was uh I can't quite articulate it. It's like it's filled up with something that feels really yummy. You know, it's like I literally how I'm sensing myself right now in my body feels more saturated with a kind of goodness and alignment than it did before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I find that radical. And I
Yeah.
mean,
And it's what
I also,
gets people hooked once you, yeah, it's an
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
thing. Yeah. You come
yeah,
once, yeah, you go, that's what you'll come back for more.
yeah. So there are some things that from a practitioner or competence point of view that I want to pull out of what happened in that focusing session.
Yeah.
One of the things that I can't remember if it's your level 3 class or 4 class or something like that, but you talk about kind of the contour of a focusing journey where
Mm-hmm.
the first like you end so you like you know a person who's like what the hell just happened you know like
Yeah.
you know why were you reflecting certain phrases back at me, why did you ask why did you
Mm-hmm.
ask me to do certain things, what the hell am I saying, you know, like it would be very witchy, you know what I mean, to just watch this and be like what the hell is this. So I want to demystify it in a certain
It,
sense and kind of, you know, like
yeah, it is. It
um
is just so simple.
yeah,
So I'll try my example that I
okay,
like. I like this idea that you're out, you're in town. Maybe you're in something like a grocery store. So you're just doing your, and you meet someone you know, and so it's or you see them. So there's this whole interesting thing too. Like
mm-hmm.
there's a choice. There's so many choice points that are happening
Yeah.
Right. And they're all relational. Essentially, these are all relational skills. So there's a choice point. Are you going to, acknowledge that person right now? And then if we acknowledge them, like, so that's this step of making contact, then, acknowledging. And then as you acknowledge, uh, there's, a choice point of, are we going to, you know, have a little conversation? So are you going to walk toward them and
Mm-hmm.
actually say something? And then once you do, like, again, there's another choice point. Uh, hey, is there something we have to talk about and connect about that feels really alive? And, once we get outside, we're going to stand out there and, find a place to talk a bit. Or you could even make the choice, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee somewhere. Let's go actually sit down for a while. We haven't seen each other, and hey, there's something,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and both people, yeah. Anyway, of course, it's always relational, but those are essentially, it's, yeah, the steps, like you said, the shape. It's first you have to see it, because we can. It's so funny how we ignore, or again, for instance, that whole sense of, if you're not in relationship, you're kind of agreeing with that belief or framework right now, and then, yeah, you're not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this, yeah, this self-awareness skill, and then in that acknowledgement, then, so you've made contact, and are we going to settle in? So the next step is kind of, yeah, settling in, and then does it feel like you're actually going to deepen? And so the
Mm-hmm.
deepen is, yeah, so there is this sense, so it's that similar journey that we do all the time. uh we make those choices all the time, whether to, even, I mean, I definitely am sometimes in the store and I'm like, oh, there's so and so, and, oh, that could be a long conversation, and I actually intentionally kind of go down the other aisle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we do it all the time. And then sometimes we're actually really, and both people are just, yeah, it feels really important to connect right now, and it feels like one of those synchronistic moments that you wouldn't have wanted to miss.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so there we go. Anyway, see what.
Yeah. Yeah. So just pulling out like the contour, it's like the first thing is in a focusing journey. Well, so that was an analogy, right? For a whole focusing
Yeah.
journey, what happens? It's like, um, the first thing you do is you make contact with something that's in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, well,
Well,
actually, the
yeah,
first thing maybe is before that, which the
is kind
invitation.
of, you have to see it. Well, so that's the whole interesting thing. uh, you have to acknowledge, and that's the self
Oh, I
awareness,
see. I
because,
see. Yeah.
and that would become, kind of come with the invitation. You're right,
Right.
because so in our daily life, our body, so this is what we like to say, our body is always communicating with us, actually, and we're often not home. We're
Right.
not listening. We're
Right.
not
Right. Right.
listening.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the thing. As you practice this more, like, we practice first, kind of with intentional, with another person in sessions. The whole relational aspect makes it easier. uh, but the goal is that naturally you begin to use your body this way, and these are skills of interoception, where
Right. Yep.
you're there, all of a sudden you can tell something's going on in your gut. Okay, okay, is there something in my environment that my body's communicating to me? Let me, and you actually drop in, and, and it's so interesting, because sometimes you can drop in and it'll actually say, oh, it was that, something you had for lunch. It's churning a little too much, or we're having trouble, we're, and it'll actually tell you that, like, you're like, oh, it's lunch. But lots of times you go in and it's like, no, it's more, it's, and that's where it would take the slowing down. It's not
Yeah.
just about lunch, it's something more.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so it's like in a focusing session, what you do is you make an invitation. Something is here. We just
Mm-hmm.
assume. We make that assumption that something is here.
Yes.
Yeah. And so with the assumption that something is here, we slow down and then create the inner conditions to make contact with that thing, to let that thing
Mm-hmm.
arise, to let
Mm-hmm.
that thing kind of reveal itself.
Yeah.
And once it has revealed itself, then we kind of welcome it and acknowledge its presence in a certain kind of like
Mm-hmm.
almost as if you like were to discover, like you were walking in the woods and all of a sudden there was a deer over there or something, just kind of just acknowledging its presence, and then
Yeah.
this is where I get really, I geek out about this particular moment, because there's so much that happens in this moment where this thing, if you respect it as an actual inner entity, like a part, if you're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
parts work or Gurdjieff's idea of many eyes, it's like it's a part of you. But if you respect it as its own entity, it has a current emotional state. It might be shy, it might be afraid of you, it might be really angry, it might be
Mm-hmm.
super frustrated about pacing around. It's this moment of acknowledging its presence is also in a certain way taking an impression of its state.
Yes.
Yeah. And then um kind of the next assumption that we make is that what it needs is just to be allowed to be exactly as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not trying to fix it, you're not, if it's frustrated, you're not trying to calm it down, you're just welcoming it as it is. And the key, as you've been saying, it's this relationship piece. The whole point of focusing is to then enter into a relationship with this thing. Yeah. And people, like, whatever that thing is shows up differently for people. Like in our classes, I was fascinated by the variety of ways that some
Bodies
people
communicate with us
yeah,
all different ways. It's so
some
cool.
for some people it's just a color, for some people it's a phrase,
Yeah.
for some people it's literally like a deer, or a whale, or like an entity, something is there.
Images
Yeah,
come. Yeah.
image. Yeah. Or sometimes it's like they know something is there, but it's behind a bush and it's shy, it's not out yet,
Mm-hmm.
these kinds of things. And so the whole thing is that there you are making this step of making contact and then acknowledging it and then waiting for it to kind of acknowledge you back. And then,
Yeah, and that's a
you
very
know,
important aspect. Like that moment to me, yeah, right. That magic is actually when you can tell it sees you.
yeah.
That's
Yes. Yeah,
huge,
yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
that's the inner authenticity, truth that it's I don't know. I just say priceless. Uh,
Yeah.
you have you have yeah that in place.
Yeah. And so once you're there, once you sort of mutually acknowledge each other, then you're hanging out. Then things happen. Then
Yeah,
they
that's when change can happen
yeah.
because
Yeah.
now you're in relationship for sure. And so it's an interesting thing
Yeah.
because sometimes, so like you drop in and you think you're creating a welcoming space, but so for things that are kind of deep within us, I call neurologically isolated, or they would be things associated with traumas
Sure.
or
Yep.
more stuck patterns from our
Yep.
childhood,
Yep.
or even generational. Um, those they're so used to not being in the present moment. They're so used to being alone as they are. Like that's just the way it is. They are this, that it can take a while for them to see you. For that's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's just very. It's just part of the process.
Yeah. One of the things that I find so that I sometimes get self-conscious about talking about this with people, because a lot of my clients are like business people, who've like
Yeah,
their relationship with me is one of the first moments of their life. Maybe they're 30 something, 40 something years old, that they've actually started to encounter themselves in a real interior way. And
right.
all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, you should try you should try focusing. You should meet my friend Sandy. And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, oh, you're just gonna, meet the inner deer. You're gonna meet this, and it's gonna be shy or whatever. But anyway, but it's funny to talk about these, like, these inner entities that kind of exists in you, and to speak of them as if they are their own entities, that they have an intelligence, that they're shy, that they're buried, that it takes a long time for them to get comfortable with you, these kinds of things. But I I wonder just if that's how, as human beings, we personify things, and that's how we just make sense of it. It's literally how I experience it. Experientially, it feels like I'm discovering an entity, and it has a
Mm-hmm.
sentience, and it speaks to me. That's how I
Mm-hmm.
experience it. You know,
Yeah.
um, and we could geek out about the neuroscience or what actually, sort of quote unquote, what's actually happening. But that's certainly the story that generates itself automatically in me as I do this process. Um, but anyway, if you can take the leap of faith and just accept that this is what's happening, you're meeting an entity inside you that is a part of you, and you can kind of enter a relationship with it, then something very profound happens, which is, um, well, a couple things. First of all, like if so, I think of focusing. A lot of times, I introduce focusing by first introducing the idea of parts work,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think of it as sort of a cousin with
Mm-hmm.
its own kind of genome, separate from
Yeah.
internal family
Yeah.
systems, but it's kind of its own thing. But they're
Yeah.
similar in the sense that
Yeah.
there are parts.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is like you think that you're this unified inner consciousness. Actually, no, you have a lot of different parts, and also you have what we like an assumption we make is that you have a self, a self with a capital S. And when you discover one of these entities and you come into relationship with it, what is the thing? What of you is in relationship with that thing? It's actually you with a capital Y, yourself, you know. And um so like if you go back and watch the focusing session we just did, like that moment where you were like, we acknowledged that it was very strong, this entity,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of placed its location right here, and then you were like, oh, so you need to get bigger, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of my favorite kinds of moments in focusing, where it's like, oh right, I literally, it's like it's a moment of
You
self-remembering.
literally create space.
Yeah.
I think
And
that
yeah.
my classes are called Creating Space for Lasting Change. And I one of the skills is I really feel like being able to um, move within our inner, like to understand that as the world out here has space, we have space in here, and we can actually move. We can,
Yeah.
yeah, and space is our power. Like our, yeah, we can create space, and we
There's
can
yeah.
move within. Like we can move closer to something. Like when our heart, there's sadness somewhere. Often, so what comes, sadness. If you have sadness, I mean, just again, we can equate to our outer world. Like if you have a friend who's sad, uh, and you see them sad, some of us might do this. You might just walk out of the room, but actually, what might be helpful, and what comes to me, if I have a friend who's sad, and we can even just think of an animal too. What happens? I would naturally move toward it, sit alongside, and actually,
Yeah.
and often just reach my hand without saying anything.
Yeah.
It's just that the sadness then is not alone.
There you go.
Yeah, and right. So that whole, what's needed here each time, it's beautiful. It keeps you in the present moment. Like that's the other thing that can happen. One thing I'll mention in any focusing session, and again in our daily life, we are typically using our brain from that merged place, like the way they show on those neural scans, you know. And that happens within a session too, where we can kind of get too close, and then we become sad ourself rather than the one being with the sad. And uh, essentially, the focus and technique has developed all these ways to help you stay back in relationship, and then it can change again. Essentially, when you're too close. So the whole spatial dynamics is just, and it's fascinating. And like you
Yeah.
said, like, I'm just like, each person, it's so different.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. This is what's so what I could just geek out about this all day is from the facilitator point of view, like that there actually is, like everything that we have been talking about and the focusing session itself, it seems like this amorphous kind of dreamlike inner blobby state, but actually there's this very particular process that's going on,
Hmm.
and the kinds of reflections you're giving are um, designed with real precision and intention to help the person who's focusing become more deeply in contact and relationship with whatever it is that there is arising in them. And
Hmm.
so, man, it's just, it's, I mean, I want to get into that in a second because I think that's a really interesting thing to just geek out about and know about.
Hmm.
Um, but just to follow the rest of the journey of the folks. So it's like you enter in, you sort of descend into your inner space, you make contact, you form the relationship, and then in relationship something shifts, right? Just the relationship, it's being in relationship allows for something to happen, communication to happen, a different new kind of understanding,
Hmm.
a shift in perspective, a growing and expansion of your actual self to include and not feel so small in the face of this strong thing, but actually to incorporate it into yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and and then the leaving the focusing session is, I think, a very powerful and um, kind of misunderstood moment. Or a lot of times what I see with beginning focusers is they'll just like, okay, done, and they just like open their eyes and they're out. But
Hmm.
they're missing this whole process
Yeah. The
that we talked about of
integrate time
yeah,
for integration.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you arrive through a focusing session at a new state of relationship with this thing that has arisen. You know, like prior to the focusing session, you were not really in relationship with this thing. It was just sort of in you, blended with you. It was sort of running amok inside you, or was isolated and causing inner tensions. Via focusing, you come into relationship with it. Then you're there in relationship, and you kind of you come almost like, it's almost like a handshake or a salute or a hug or just an acknowledgement that
Hmm.
like we're together now, we're in
Yeah.
relationship now. And then that sensibility and whatever has sort of been decided, you could say, in the process gets, you sort of like breathe it into the rest of your body, and it just kind of just fills you up, you know. And then after that process, you sort of gently come back to, quote unquote, you arise back into, quote unquote, reality or the world. You open your eyes again.
Hmm.
But that inner state has actually shifted something at the level of your body, and um, really all three centers. It's shifted your body, it's shifted the way you're actually sensing yourself, it's shifted your experience of your identity, and it's also shifted your perspective on what's actually happening in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just like, I'm amazed by it. Actually, I'm actually, you know what? I'm actually amazed by it.
It is. It is.
It is amazing. It is so
It
crazy. It's amazing.
it is. It shows what we're capable of as human beings, and it's the essence of being able to evolve, adapt. Yeah, I really feel like uh, that when we practice, we're not only gifting ourselves and the people around us, but however, like, we are contributing to the evolution of the human brain uh, in ways that, we might not. I can't really, pinpoint. However, uh, yeah,
Yeah.
we can mention like quantum physics or something, but yeah, what comes to mind is that idea that a butterfly's wings over there, and we feel the air from that you know
Yeah.
across the other side of the planet, literally. uh, I feel like I experience those kind of little miracles all the time. uh, uh,
Hmm.
it's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
it's exciting.
So can we geek out a little bit about the facilitator point of view? Like, how are you thinking about what you're saying,
Hmm.
and the like at each stage of the process? What is like? How you're noticing like checkpoints of like, okay, the focuser is now here. Like one thing to say is that as a focusing companion or facilitator, you sort of instruct the person who's focusing to take you along the journey by
Hmm.
staying inside, like you keep their eyes closed, but they report every once in a while what
Hmm.
is happening inside. So where they are in relationship with what they're noticing about the thing, and sometimes there are long stretches of silence, but there's a way that you're kind of tracking how in contact with this thing they actually are or not, and there are phrases that you say, invitations you make to help them get more into contact. So can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So essentially, I'm also going within, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole interesting thing where at any point, for instance, your process. So when I go within, I can feel your process in my body,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that's where, and then I have the skills of my goal is to help you help this feel welcome, and also
Yes.
to help you. Essentially, I want to keep you in relationship as much as possible, uh, and uh, and so via my sensing, would be how I'm going to come. I'm getting into the perspective of what has arrived for you as much as I can to help get a feel for what it's trying to communicate to you, and then by that I can give a suggestion. And I am also aware of, right, the whole general process, like whether you so it's interesting because some people might when something first arrives, even the first time they've ever tried this, uh, if it is something that they have naturally kind of been in relationship with already, like it may already trust them and communicate, go right into sitting down and just spilling what it needs to. Like our body is always looking for those opportunities for us to be in relationship with us. If something like can tell that it would like to be different for you, like it can tell that what it's doing for you now is not actually helping you thrive. I, that's the whole total amazingness under this, that I can trust, is that I trust your body wants your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole twist right there, because a lot of us, particularly if we're in like chronic pain or something, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hard to, how can this pain want my well-being, like.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's
I get
because
it. Yeah.
we're coming from the perspective of the something wanting the pain to go away. When we keep agreeing with that, and then
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen. And so that's something we haven't gotten into either. That often, and it is kind of because of the natural, uh, our brain is mostly divided into the right and left hemisphere, and with not much connection, is particularly where the brain is right now in evolution. Very little connection over our corpus callosum, and so often that's what we can do, is bring them together,
Mm-hmm.
and then there comes this new kind of working together and understanding of two perspectives that are very important. We want both of those perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so there's a lot going on
Mm-hmm.
as a companion, as a facilitator. uh, I want to be right there, like as an outer layer.
Yeah. And there are kind of phases, right, for that you're tracking. Like for example, um, certain phrases you would say in the beginning, but not in the end.
Yeah.
Like for example, I remember So the first thing to do is just to make contact, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I remember in class we would do these exercises of, it's like the first thing that the focuser, meaning the person who is focusing, says says they notice. Um, Instead of giving them some kind of suggestion for like, okay, maybe say hi, whatever, you're sometimes just literally repeating their words back to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, like as a focuser, I might say, yeah, I'm sensing something really stormy in my gut. And then you would say something like, I don't know, what would you say?
Um, yeah. So you're sensing something stormy in your gut.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally the same phrase.
Yeah.
But because it's coming from you, something magical happens where it's
And that
like,
you check back and
yeah.
the stormy will come back with a no, it's not stormy. And so this is a whole
Yeah.
interesting goes back to kind of what I mentioned about the two hemispheres is um so so the way it kind of is so our left hemisphere is where we've stored everything we've learned about being a human being. It has patterns and it also has our language center. And so it tends to communicate more with words. So there'll tend to be, a lot of thoughts and whereas our body, so our right hemisphere communicates more with sensations, emotions, imagery, gestures. So an interesting thing I like to look at, I think a lot of us can relate to this, is that when we first like try to kind of connect with our body, what often can be happening is that kind of, the one we hear more often, our thoughts, are talking for our body. And so that can happen. And so then there can be, you know, a sense of, you know, allowing it to describe itself and
Yeah.
separating it from something that thinks it's stormy or is it's so interesting. And you would take that back and then, yeah, but the
Hmm.
huge thing is, when you first said before, there's a cultural conditioning that happens early on, like you said, where what we're learning to do is that the most important thing is to show up. It's not, and to just be with. And that's simple showing up and keeping ourselves in relationship. Uh, our our body will change and will, yeah. Uh, I mean, meditators know this. That's that thing, like, yeah, if you stay with something, it's going to change.
Hmm.
If they can keep themselves in relationship. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, so there's a definite of emphasis on the simple being, power of being with.
Yeah. This this thing about reflecting back the word and taking the word
Mm-hmm.
back in to check with your felt sense. It's fascinating to me. So I read some of Gendlin's book, Experiencing and the Creation of Meaning, which is a very dense philosophical book about
Mm-hmm.
two, as he describes it, kind of layers of meaning. There's the symbolic realm of language and like you maybe even like mathematical symbols and the way we typically express ourselves through language. Maybe that would be left brain kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the level of direct experience,
Yeah.
um, which is like a lower level. And it's like um, at any moment, you could pause yourself and you might not be saying a word, but there is some meaning in you that you are experiencing directly through your sensation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And if you sat with it, you could potentially articulate like this whole question of meaning exists before you put words to it. So where is it?
Yes.
You know, and it's like in the felt sense, it's in the body. And I love this way you're saying like stormy. It's like one part of you maybe doesn't like this part of you that quote unquote feel stormy in your stomach, you know, and it provides you this word stormy. And so you describe this thing in your stomach as stormy. And then you're like, okay, you're feeling something stormy in your chest. And then you take that as a focuser, your job is then to take that phrase back and then just kind of see how that landed. And it's like, check in with that thing in your stomach. And it's like, did that thing feel well described by that word? You know?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is the resonance. And this is
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
this is huge because once a person develops this, I mean, I sometimes if I've worked with someone for a while and it takes a little bit for them to get that, I mean, there's like tears because this is what this is what we want. This makes you, when you can um, understand and be able to, consistently get resonances. So
Yeah.
a sense
Yeah.
of rightness, and to be able to distinguish, for instance, is the stormy coming from, something else? Because when you go and you actually sit there with the sensation in your stomach, if it does not feel seen, you will get a sense. It won't change. It doesn't feel acknowledged or seen. And so stormy isn't right. And stormy, whether you attribute it, but essentially it's a good idea if you were, is to welcome that there's something gave you that word stormy. And so that's here in
Yeah.
your space. And
Yeah.
so actually, so you can often end up with kind of, a whole tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Uh,
and and so this is where I think the inner spatial awareness helps too, because if somehow you give it a place, okay, there, the stormy arrived and it's here, but it's not. And then you go back to your stomach and you listen freshly and see, right, it often does, it takes, like you said, that lower layer. uh and and what I want to mention, when you were mentioning, Gendlin talking about the explicit, so the power of what we're going for here is when something feels understood for how it is now, that's what releases it to potentially take a step.
yeah.
And
That's
so
the
that's
key. Yeah.
your whole goal, helping something feel understood. If it's uncomfortable right now, we come from the perspective that that doesn't mean, it just needs to be acknowledged and understood for what is this discomfort about,
Yeah.
and that alone can free it to change.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So can you say some words about what is hard about that? I mean, I experience actually I have something in my head I'll share and then want to get your reaction. Like when so for Enneagram people listening, like let's say you're working with a type 3. Um and type 3s are like generally speaking pretty driven, and like a certain engine can start revving that's like I want to be like on my game, you know. And then there's another part that also wants to rest or feels like constricted by that. But there's like two warring engines, you could say, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, or a part that's aware that it's like, yeah, I do want to be, I want to rev this engine, but I don't want to do it in a way that disconnects it from myself. There's all kinds of little complicated texture dynamics, but the kind of the mere acknowledgement that I want to rest, that's in me,
Mm-hmm.
can be really hard. Just just to welcome it, you know, just to welcome into the space. And so from a parts work focusing kind of point of view, we would try to acknowledge that actually that resistance is coming from another part that we would then
Mm-hmm.
also welcome, you know, and that there's these kind of two different agendas. And
Yeah.
that, you know, but that that can be so hard, you know. It can be so hard to acknowledge the thing we don't want to acknowledge. And um, focusing I found to be a good way to kind of gently do it. But sometimes with people who are inexperienced with inner work, or haven't really, are kind of new at excavating their interior space, don't quite get there. It's like they can't quite acknowledge it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's okay. So that's one of
Yeah.
the whole interesting things
Yeah.
is uh, so from a facilitator point of view, acceptance that that's where they want to be right now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's okay, because then we can still kind of see, from there still may be some, things that they can be in relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, I like to say it's like it's kind of here, right behind you, and so, for instance, if that's the one driven, uh, it can, you're what you're bringing then to your whole inner space is kind of a little bit of harshness,
Yeah.
uh, of let's get keep let's keep going, and that's the whole, that's the whole choice, and that's the whole wonderful thing about focusing. No one's telling you what qualities to create within yourself. You are always in control of that, and what we do kind of do is you're following your body. So, for instance, if not much is going to happen inside you until that moves out here, then you will find focusing isn't working for you, because
Yeah.
not much will show up and communicate with you. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and so that can happen, and that's okay. Uh, you know, we don't want to tell anyone how to run their inner space,
Mm.
and I don't know what comes. I mean, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna look
This
to
is.
you. It's this whole. It's like
Yeah.
how, we all have those friends around us maybe that we know, and it feels like they tell their story the same way, uh, and they're and and yeah, uh, at some point, essentially, their body will get their attention in the way that it can, and you know, and that might work. But
Yeah.
it is kind of tragic in a sense, if we buy into this and we start to go along. But this idea that our body is always communicating with us all the time, and that we're not actually showing up in kind of the mentor role. And so that's the thing when you mention when there's two. So what's huge to me, so so often, if there's two and they have opposing views, and they're actually inhibiting each other, which is um, the majority of the connections over the corpus callosum of the average human brain, about 80% are inhibiting each other. So you may run into this in yourself.
Yeah.
Uh, what we want to do is we want to rewire where you are there, and you want each of them not, at each other. That neural connection is there, but you want to rewire through you. And then whatever qualities you bring in that moment, how you treat this relationship, they
Mm-hmm.
get rewired, and they look at each other now
Mm-hmm.
in this way. So the power of the qualities you bring, uh, and how you um, treat yourself. Uh, um, I don't know. We're a lot of us are kind of violent in there, and there's
Yeah.
just we just want to say it can be different,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not easy, because it does take standing up to then something that is used to being in control, and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. So I think maybe we'll come to a close soon, but I'm wondering
okay.
if there's anything else that feels alive for you that you want to bring up.
That feels pretty good to land on the quality of the relationship, and that you're always at choice, and and the whole intention is to support each other in feeling empowered to create the world within, kind of that you might like to see out there.
So if people wanted to work with you or take a class from you, where should they go?
Where should they go? To learnfocusing.org.
Okay, cool. I'll put that in the show notes too.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. What's this been like for you?
Fun. We have to be present. I consider that a gift whenever I get to practice live interactions.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just kind of in closing, I'll just say I think that my work with you and my learning focusing through our classes and stuff had a profound, major impact on me. And for people listening who also are following kind of the development of my theory of the centers, kind of body, heart, minds, focusing was like a key unlocker in terms of my relationship with body intelligence, like what it even means, when we talk about the intelligence of the body. So anyway, yeah, no, I've taken all 4 of your level classes and it's a whole thing. So yeah, I really can't recommend focusing enough.
Beautiful.
And you. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining me for today's discussion with my friend and teacher, Sandy Jahmi Burg. Once again, if you want to learn more about her, you can go to learnfocusing.org. You can take one of her classes, as I have done, or you can sign up to do an individual focusing session with her as your focusing companion. She is truly one of the most gifted practitioners of any inner work modality that I've ever met. Her gifts really shine in session when she is doing that thing that she did, what you watched her do with me. She's quite amazing at it. So I highly recommend doing that. If you have enjoyed this podcast and have learned from it, then I would super appreciate if you subscribe to our channel at the Enneagram School on YouTube. If you have suggestions for who I should have as my next guest or other kinds of modalities that I should look at, or any other comments that you'd like, please leave them in the comment section on YouTube. I read all the comments and would sometimes respond there. If you're listening to this as a podcast on either Spotify or Apple, that you can leave up to a 5-star review. I super appreciate reviews. It's a very easy and zero cost way to support me and the show and the school. So please consider doing that. And finally, I have an announcement, which is that John Lukovich and I are almost done with our intro Enneagram course. If you're interested to learn more about that or curious about being one of the first people to know when it drops, please go to theenneagramschool.com and sign up for our email list. That's where I communicate all of those kinds of things direct to your inbox. So once again, that's theenneagramschool.com, and that's where you'll find announcements about our upcoming course and also other announcements. For example, I am starting to do live coaching in front of an audience. So what I'll do is I'll take a volunteer for a person who knows their Enneagram type, and then I will do a live coaching session with them in front of a small audience on Zoom. For the details and logistics of how to sign up for that, please check out theenneagramschool.com. Okay, thank you so much for joining me with this conversation, and I will see you next time.